Hello, 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 and welcome to Leadership Behind the Scenes. I am so excited to be having a conversation today with a phenomenal leader who has done it all, absolutely all. Katharine Loucaidou is an amazing woman who has a background in leadership from education to real estate to coaching and a whole lot of things in between. And yes, we could talk about her successes, but that's the easy part.
Mm.
We're talking about leadership behind the scenes. And so, Katharine, thank you so much for being on the show. I am so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I'm really happy to be here. I can't wait to dive in. I think we're going to have a juicy conversation today behind the scenes of leadership.
Yes, I believe so too. Because you have done it all. You've been in so many seats. You've been an entrepreneur. You've done it all, and I'm excited about that. And that just qualifies you to the umpteenth degree to talk about the real behind the scenes when it comes
Yes.
to leadership. And
Yeah.
so um, I believe prior to the show, you mentioned that you had been in education. And so, what was the moment when you realized that your next step wasn't just an idea, but something that you had to see through after education?
Interesting. So I've been through every part of education. So what I did at the age of 22 is I decided that I was going to leave Canada, where I grew up and got my undergraduate degree, and I was going to move to a Mediterranean island by myself. So one morning, so I'll back up. I had submitted my resumes basically around the world. I just wanted to get out there in the world and work and experience life. So my father is from Cyprus, which is a small Mediterranean island south of Greece. And when I say I literally sent my resume everywhere, I mean, you name it, UN, UNESCO, all around the world. 4 o'clock one morning, I get a phone call. Hi, Catherine. I am the headmistress of a British private school in Cyprus. Wondering if you'd like to come and take a job here teaching our primary school students English as well as French. Being 22, I have not been through teachers college. I was like, oh, absolutely, I can do that. Sure. She says you need to be here within 3 weeks by the time school starts. I packed up my bedroom as a 22-year-old, very naive Canadian girl, and I moved there. And so, what I didn't ask were the important questions of how much will I get paid? And what am I actually doing? So, I realized that I was going to have to wing the teaching part because I had never taught. That, which I realized very quickly came naturally to me. I was very able to keep a class disciplined and captivated. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't going to pay me enough to even be able to survive. So I then got another job. So I worked 6:30 to 1:30, which was a normal school morning for primary school. And then I worked 2:30 to 8:30, teaching English as a second language to high school students. I then moved my way up the ladder by living there. I then got into a private English high school, very sort of high caliber students. And then from there, I decided I was going to get my master's degree in education. And then I moved into university and then I taught university. So I've been through the gamut of every age you can imagine, which gave me a great understanding of people and students because when I look at adults now, and I don't know if you're the same after having been a principal, but I look at adults as just the grown up version of the students that I was teaching. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's really who they are. And
Yes.
what finally decided for me to leave that part of the formal teaching was I just wanted to try something different. I had been through an extremely traumatic health issue when I was living in Cyprus. So when I was 33, as I was going to bed one evening, I had been teaching after hours some private lessons. All of a sudden, I felt like I was being crushed. And I realized I was having a massive heart attack. And I was on my way to bed. I shouted for my husband just before I kind of collapsed on the floor, but I was awake the whole time. He managed to get me in his car because I lived in the countryside, so there was no ambulance coming out to me anytime soon. And all the way to the hospital, I remember looking at him and I said, I'm going now. I won't make it. And he said, no, 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 just hang on, hang on. And I remember the life literally being sucked out of me on that drive to the hospital. So then this is where, for me, there was a series of miracles that started happening. As we pulled into the driveway of this private hospital, which was the closest one to my house there, the only doctor on duty that night was standing in the driveway who happened to be the head of cardiology. So
Wow.
he brought me in, he gave me all the medication, he tried to stabilize me. He said, you're having a massive heart attack right now. I'm going to do whatever I can. And from that day, that was a Tuesday. From Tuesday until Saturday, I had multiple heart attacks. I had one every day until I got to the following Saturday. By the following Saturday, the surgeon came into my room, and I remember he looked at me and he said, I don't know what else to do. I can't stabilize you. I've given you everything that I can. And he said, Katharine, we need to really think positively. And by the grace of God, these need to stop so that I can go in and see what's wrong. I remember at 33, I was lying in that bed and I remember looking out the window and I said, God, I have two small boys. I said, I'm 33. I haven't done anything yet. And I just remember thinking, just let me live. Let me live, and I will go on to do whatever I can to to be that best person that I can. For 12 hours, I had no symptoms. On Sunday, they put me in for an angiogram and they realized I had four arteries blocked. So on Monday morning at 6 a.m., I went in for triple bypass surgery at 33 years old with nothing wrong with me. Nobody understood why I was in there. All of my blood tests were clear. So I went through 9 hours of surgery. There was about a week and a half recovery in the hospital from that. It's a brutal, brutal surgery. And when they discharged me and I had been home for a week, I then had a stroke because of the amount of hours I had been in surgery. So I went back to the hospital. They gave me more medication because that's just generally what doctors do. If we don't know how to fix you, we'll just give you more medication to try and keep you stable. So after that, and this is, I think, the beginning of where the way that I think started to shift. I remember feeling very sorry for myself. I just kept saying, you know, why? Why did this have to happen to me? Why can't I hold my kids anymore? Because after you've had open heart surgery, you can't lift anything heavy. And why do I have to have scars everywhere? And it was just so much of a pity party, which I feel was warranted. But at what point does it stop? And being in Cyprus, we got one cable channel, one. I remember lying in my bed and I was so upset this day. And I said, fine, I'll just put the TV on to distract myself. Oprah, imagine Oprah on TV in Cyprus. She was
Uh-huh.
interviewing a guest. And
Mhm.
she was speaking to this guest, and this guest kept saying, I don't know why it had to happen to me. I don't understand why this happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like that person. And Oprah just said one sentence, and that's when it clicked. Oprah said to this woman, why not you? What makes you so different from everyone else that you shouldn't have to go through something in life? And that's when I
Wow.
said to myself, that's so true.
Mhm.
From then, that day, I said, okay, I'm going to get back up and I'm here for a reason. I just went through all of these different things that could have killed me, but they didn't. So I'm here for a reason. So that's when I decided that I was going to go and open my own business, which I did on that foreign island. I opened a children's entertainment center, which was they didn't have the the kind of play areas like we do here in Canada or North America with the little balls and the little cars. So I decided I
Mhm.
wanted to do something born of me that didn't exist there. So that was my first entrepreneurial endeavor while I was teaching. So this is where kind of teaching started to come out of my blood, is that I decided that starting a business and marketing and doing all these things was such a rewarding experience. It was like creating your
Um,
baby and then watching it bloom when the customers finally come inside. That for me was where the education part started to wane, because this was
mhm.
far more exciting being an entrepreneur.
Wow, what an amazing, what an amazing, I dare call it a backstory because it is essential to who you are today.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with me. There are a couple of patterns that I noticed in your story as you were telling me. Um, Steve Harvey, I believe he wrote a book. I know I heard a snippet of a speech about it, but he wrote a book called Jump. And he talked about sometimes, we can be so cautious until we miss opportunities. Other times, you just have to jump. You have to
Yes.
take the leap, even
Yes.
when you don't know where you're going to end up. And that's what was really coming at me when you
Mm.
told the story of the jump you made from Canada to Cyprus. I mean, that is huge, to have that much gumption to take that jump with no experience, knowing that you didn't know have the experience
Or
and
the
didn't even.
language. I didn't know Greek
Yes.
either. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
And, not even knowing the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
had you known the right questions to ask, you may not have gone to Cyprus, not that time.
True. So
But
true.
oh my goodness, you took the leap. That is the kind of boldness that leaders have to be
Yes.
leaders.
Yes.
Sometimes caution, I'm not saying throw caution to the wind every single time, but then there comes a time, you know what, we're doing this. We're
Yes.
we're just doing this. And you
Yeah.
did it again after all, can I say after nearly dying,
Oh,
with
I
all that
was. I mean, they actually, when you have triple bypass, they do remove your heart to bypass the arteries that they have taken from other parts of your body. Then they put your heart back in and restart you. So I have definitely been there and come back. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. And then a stroke on top of that. Oh my goodness. But I love how, with all of that devastation in your life, I don't know if it could get any worse than what it was, how you turned your pain into purpose. And you got to that point. You asked a question a moment ago, when does the pity party stop?
Hmm.
Yes, it was justified. I don't think I would find anybody that would say, that it wasn't justified after all you went through. But at what point, like you said, does it stop? And that is amazing. And so you entered the world of entrepreneurship, which is wonderful. And so were there any distractions that showed up once you committed to this next path?
I think that there's always distractions, and I think we create them for ourselves, to be quite honest. This is what I have learned now after 30 years, is that we tend to want to blame people and things and circumstances and economies and everything that's around us. At the end of the day, what I've realized is that it all comes down to our decisions. We have control over everything that we do. So that business, that children's entertainment business was going very well. But we decided that at the same time that that was going well, I was compromising my health because I was still teaching during the day and running this in the evenings, afternoons, and weekends. And so we decided that for my health, for the future of our family, we needed to make one more decision, which would be to move back to Canada, which my husband and children had never lived here before. But in the spirit of knowing that there could be a brighter future, the health system might be better for me and help me. Because at the time of this decision, I was on 15 different kinds of medication, and they were making me feel so ill. So that's what we did. We decided to move back to Canada, start all over again with nothing, no job, no house, and lived with my parents for a few months. And then we started one day at a time and finding another job, finding a home to live in, putting my kids into Canadian schools. My kids had been in Greek schools. So I had pulled them out 6 months earlier. And being a teacher for 20 years, I decided to homeschool them on the entire Canadian curriculum of 3 grades in 6 months, which I did. So they actually came into the Canadian classrooms knowing more about those grades than the kids who were in class because I had overschooled them, I think, but it was to their advantage. So, distractions. My distraction was fear. The fear of what if this is the wrong decision? What if I mess up my kids' lives by moving them to a different country? What if my husband doesn't find a job in a country he's never lived in? What if I don't like, there's the what ifs, they never end. I mean, never. Like that list will go on forever. But at some point, what you have to do is say to yourself, do I have confidence in everything that I've accomplished so far in life? Because if I could have gotten this far on what I knew, imagine how much further I could go in a country where I was hoping there was more opportunity and a better chance at good health. My goal was to get my health back again. And so we just said we have nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain. And so
Wow.
that's what we did.
Good. That is fantastic. You know, sometimes people say hitting rock bottom is such a horrible place. Um, but it changes everything. It changes your outlook. It changes, your level of risk and
Hmm.
caution. You can't get lower than the bottom. And
It's true.
so everything has got to be up from here. Something you said really stuck in my mind. You were talking about your biggest distraction being fear and that fear over whether you're making the right decisions or not. One of the things I found when I was a school administrator is that as the leader of the campus, you're always on. You're
Yes.
always up. You cannot have a
Yes.
bad day because if
Hmm.
you do, the entire
Hmm.
campus does.
So true.
And and you have to uh, constantly make decisions, on the
Yeah.
fly. I couldn't tell a parent, let me pray about that and I'll get right back to you. You had to make decisions
Yeah.
constantly, and
Yeah.
that can be exhausting. And you
Hmm.
go home thinking, did I make the right decisions today?
Hmm.
What are the ramifications of that
Hmm.
decision? Who's
Hmm.
going to be affected? How am I
Yeah.
going to handle the fallout? And
Yeah.
so I can definitely see how all of that just played in your mind. That creates fear. It really does,
It
because
does.
if you
Yeah.
go ahead.
I find that especially since I still felt very young and naive. And I still felt like I had only just been through the worst of the worst, but I hadn't yet learned enough from it so that my decisions going forward, like I didn't know what the outcome of this big decision would be. Now, all I could do is replay my last big decision, which was moving to a foreign country without knowing the language, without knowing the job. And yet I managed. And not only did I manage, but I managed to move up the ladder in a country I didn't know. I managed to get a master's degree. I managed to overcome open heart surgery and a stroke, and I'm still here. So obviously, I can make good decisions. And I think that this is what people forget when they get to a point where they do have to make critical decisions is you have gotten this far in life. So you obviously do know how to make decisions. The question is, can you make them better as we move forward now? So every time I make a decision now, I find that it's more strategic, it's well thought out in a shorter period of time. And that was always my goal, is to keep getting better based upon everything I've done in the past.
Yes, yes. And I know you mentioned before the show how you were in education, then in real estate, now in coaching, and there may have been other things in
Mm.
between. Um, how did you know when it was time to evolve into something else?
Such a good question, because I can literally feel it in my bones every time I've made that decision. I remember that I was going to leave teaching. I remember standing, and when I came back to Canada, luckily enough, a university hired me, and I was teaching business and communication at that university for 2 years until I just thought that that's what I would do. But I remember standing at the front of the class one day, and I just didn't feel it anymore. And I thought to myself, if I'm not feeling it, they're not feeling it from me, and that's not fair to them.
Mhm.
And so that day, I said, okay, what would be something interesting? And again, naivety. I was watching HGTV, which we never had in Cyprus. And I thought, oh my God, I could do real estate. That looks like fun. And so that's literally what possessed me to go and get my real estate license, was watching HGTV thinking that could be fun. Um, it was so far from the truth that I didn't realize that it could be as challenging and stressful as it is. But I did it nevertheless. And that instinct I have to improve myself over time is what brought me to finally get then a broker's license, and then to go on and open an independent real estate brokerage with multiple offices, which I should, in hindsight, have known that that would bring me stress I didn't need, but I wasn't thinking like that. So I did get into it, and burnout creeps up very quickly without you even realizing, until you're at the end of it, or you're at the peak of it. And we were talking about burnout before we came on. And to me, that was the most profound burnout I've ever had, was after 5 years of running that brokerage, but particularly after the whole COVID couple of years. It really was very, very challenging. And I felt it weighing on my body again. And then I remembered a promise I made to myself that I would never end up in that hospital again. And so that's when I quickly had to decide, where do I go from here? So again, that's when the next pivot came, because I had to remind myself that my goal in life is not to go back to that hospital bed ever again. And one part that I left out is, after being in Canada for 5 years, I reversed the entire heart disease, the entire operation that happened. I haven't taken medication in 12 years. I'm on no
Thank God.
medication whatsoever. The last time I went to the cardiologist, he did an ultrasound, and he said, I don't know what's happened, but it doesn't look like anything's ever happened to your heart, and all of your arteries are open.
Oh,
So
wonderful. Praise
it's
God.
it's it's wonderful, but we have to remind ourselves that where we've come from, if we don't want to go back there, we really have to protect ourselves. And
Yes.
there's nothing in this world that is important enough to remove our health and our energy from our souls. Nothing that we do is that important. And so, in knowing that and in talking to myself through that, that's when I realized we're not going back there. So, something has to change, and it needs to change now.
Oh my goodness, Catherine. Oh my goodness, you have just preached a whole sermon. That was just fantastic because as leaders, a lot of times I find that we are so caught up in the mission, especially as women leaders.
Yes.
We
Oh,
are so
yes.
mission focused and
Yes.
we're so accustomed to taking care of everybody else that we do not take care of ourselves.
Yes.
And that's dangerous on so many levels. That
Yes.
is dangerous. You know, it's so important. We start things. I don't know about you, but I'm good at starting things. But can we finish? Can we see things through to the end? And if we don't take care of our bodies, we just don't get, we're not going to get there. We are
Yeah.
not going to get there. But you are a living testimony that it can be done, it can be changed, it can be reversed.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So, what piece of advice would you give um, a younger, and no disrespect there, and when I say younger, I mean younger in experience, not age, a
That's okay.
younger,
When my son comes home from work and he tells me that the older people in his office who are 28, I just think, I can't even imagine what you think I am. So, not to
oh my
worry
good,
about that.
okay, that's funny. That is funny. But what would you tell um, a younger leader who, not just anybody. I'm not talking about, the person with absolutely no experience who wants to be, the president of the company, just but doesn't want to work for it. I'm talking about a true leader that you see they've got the it factor. What would you tell that leader about building to last?
What I've learned in 30 years is that everything comes down to the way that you think and the way you react. Those two things. I have learned not to react in business anymore. I have learned to respond. And when I say react, when we're younger, we tend to jump at things. So someone says something that's critical. It sounds very critical of us, and we jump to defend ourselves. Someone says something that is derogatory or whatever it is, and we jump to respond. I don't do that anymore. What I do is I sit back for a moment and I start thinking about why. What has made them feel like they can say this? So if it's something derogatory to me, which can happen to women in leadership, where someone is not speaking to them with the respect that they deserve, I believe that you have to call that out, and there's ways to do it. So, for example, someone says something that is disrespectful, say, I'm really sorry that you feel like that. But right now, that was something that I feel is very disrespectful. So if you'd like to discuss this again, we'll get, why don't we both take some time to think about this? And I don't think that we need to react in the moment. I think that there are times when we can step back and say, um, we're going to think about this and I'll get back to you. Or I don't think we're in the right frame of mind right now to continue this conversation. Or I don't like the direction this conversation is going. I think it's quite disrespectful. I've had a lot of that in real estate, especially being a brokerage owner. Because if you look at the statistics out there, when I used to go to brokerage leader conferences, it was 10% women, 90% men. It was only ever men on a panel being asked their opinion. And so I've been in those situations. So in that respect, I don't react anymore. I just respond with a clear mind. On the thinking part of it, I have learned to become a more strategic thinker. So, what does that mean? It means that I think about what you've said to me now, but before I answer you, I start going a few steps ahead. What are the second order consequences for anything that we've just discussed right now? And so, before I can answer you, I need to have walked myself down that path to know if that's the right direction, just like I've done my entire life. Make a decision, but what were the order of consequences and what's the worst thing that could happen depending on how I answer this question? Or what is the opportunity depending on how I answer this question? So for me, for anyone young in business and in leadership, don't think that you have to rush to answer someone. You have all the time in the world to answer the way you feel confident to answer. And I don't mean to sit back and procrastinate. I'm the opposite of a procrastinator, but I will always give you a thoughtful response. And when you do that, people will respect you more because they'll know you've thought about it and you're not just sort of running, your mouth with an opinion that wasn't well thought out.
Very well said, Catherine. Very well said. And I really think that those are key points that only come with time.
Mm,
I am so not impressed with the flood of self-proclaimed leaders who have not paid their dues. In some way, they may not have the life-threatening story that you have, but there is a cost to
yes.
leadership,
Hmm.
and um, you kind of like the introduction to that TV show back in the day called Fame, where
Oh, yeah.
Debbie Allen says, fame costs, and here is where you start paying,
Hmm.
and leadership is the same way.
Yes.
And there are certain things you have to give up, certain things you have to um, adapt to.
Hmm.
And I love how you just from what you just said, it lets me know that you don't back down, but you find a way to say what needs to be said. And that, Catherine, I'm telling you, that's an art form. That is an art form. Oh my goodness, this has been absolutely amazing, Catherine. As we go, we're going to wrap up the show, but do you have any final words of encouragement or empowerment you'd like to share with our audience today?
I would love for your audience to really trust in themselves. Um, I'm knee deep in the world of AI. I have always been. I wrote a book on it last year. But what I want people to know is even with all the noise out there, even with the media headlines and all of these things going on, trust in everything that you know when you make decisions. Don't allow, as you used the word earlier, distractions to pull you off of that direction that you are headed. And I find it so easy to be taken off your path these days with all of the distractions out there. It's very easy. And I actually had this conversation with another basically entrepreneur this morning that owns a real estate brokerage, and I just said to him, you've got to find your straight line to your goal and then just keep on that. Because if you know your straight line, you won't get pulled off by other people, by distractions, by anything. You'll just be headed there. And what's happening in the world and the environment around us, it won't affect you as much because you know where you're headed. So you just keep going in that direction.
Yes, yes. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today on the
Thank
show. We,
you.
yes, I appreciate you taking the time. It has been exciting, invigorating, empowering, and every other adjective I can think of. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation here. It's been wonderful.